Now, we need to ask step by step how the form can truly unlock the material. Let's say I provide you with a set of forms, meaning that in a particular artistic field, you learn from me. If I am in the realm of painting and you are my student, I teach you various forms, and you need to be very familiar with each one. But can you really use these forms to unlock the material? Not necessarily. So, as we dive into the fourth section, let's talk about how art expresses itself. Every piece of art is like telling us a story, making a statement. What's architecture trying to say? And what about sculptures, paintings, or every piece of music? They all have something to say. In a big picture way, if we think about it as a language, we can say that every type of art has its own way of speaking. Architecture has its own language, sculptures have their own language. No matter how much these languages have changed over time, they're always a form of communication. A big sign of independence for each type of art is its ability to stand on its own and to know how it's different from other art forms. Let's take film, for example. It's a pretty new art form, brought about by the industrial age. At first, it wasn't even considered art, just a way to have fun. In the 1930s, even Shanghai had silent films. The history of film isn't that long, right? At first, there was no sound. Then finally, we got sound films. Later, black and white films turned into color films. Then came 3D films, right? Now we're all about 3D, right? It's all there. Film has always been seen as a way to have fun. Even Empress Dowager Cixi watched a film once. How funny. Later, film really wanted to be seen as art, but it still didn't realize what its language was. It ended up being a sidekick to literature. What does it mean to watch a film? It's like watching a play that's been moved to the screen. In reality, we're enjoying literature. In the history of Chinese cinema, Xie Jin, died 2008, is a big deal, isn't he? He's like a symbol of success in Chinese cinema, the Xie Jin model. So, what's the main problem with this Xie Jin model? It always made films play second fiddle to what? Literature. It's like we're watching a play that's been put on the screen. Dialogue is super important, right? The connections between characters, the clash of inner worlds, it all has to come out through dialogue. This means that under Xie Jin's influence, what couldn't films do yet? Stand on their own. Westerners have long moved beyond this stage. Western cinema fully recognizes that it is a visual image, a visual language, constituted by light and shadow on the screen, with its primary mode of expression being montage. It pays close attention to this aspect, which is the language of art. This language cannot be replaced by literary language or any other form of language. Thus, it becomes an irreplaceable art form. Anyone studying film must first understand this. Why do you want to be a film director? The first thing you need to understand is that this is an art form that cannot be replaced by other arts. Why is it irreplaceable? Because it has its own language, and that is the most fundamental issue. Alright, let's dive into the world of art language. You know, the 5 major art forms are pretty essential. Film, for instance, is a big deal. Can you even imagine a movie without a killer soundtrack? It's a must-have. And a movie without the influence of visual art? Nope, not gonna cut it. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine watching a movie that's bagged a bunch of Oscars, like Out of Africa. It's got literature, characters, and a love story, right? It's got that literary vibe, and you can bet it's got some visual art too. Because it snagged an Oscar, people all over the world have seen it and now they're itching to travel to Africa. So, Out of Africa is a hit as an African scenic film. The whole movie is set to Mozart's music. That guy has a ton of works. The director of this movie is a genius, from start to finish. It's all Mozart, and it's used just right. So, it's got music, visual art, physical performance, and the art of voice of recitation. And let's not forget the actor's monologue. The dialogue has to be delivered just right, and that's where the art of language and voice comes in. It's pretty darn beautiful. But you know, the kind of movies we have now are starting to lose that touch. Take the Shanghai Film Studio, for example. They used to be a big deal, but now they hardly do dubbing anymore, right? They just slap on some subtitles. It used to be a major field. The dubbing actor doesn't perform on stage, they just do dubbing, right? When it's translated into Chinese, the first thing is to match the lip movements. Gotta get those lip movements spot on. After the original text is translated into Chinese, it has to match the original foreign actor's lip movements, right? But the text also has to be top-notch, and then the voice art of those dubbing actors has to bring it out. Back in the day, we had some dubbing actors that we really looked up to. Like Li Zi, and who else? Liu Guangning, died 2020, Li Zi, right? Xiao Yufeng, now that guy's got some killer dubbing skills. Who does he dub for? Let's say, for sneaky and sly characters, those sly voices, he can nail it. You can see that when we watched this movie. After being dubbed by such dubbing actors, even if you haven't been to the movie theater, you can just listen to the radio at home, right? At that time, Shanghai People's radio station often had programs like that, where you listen to a whole movie at home. So you're enjoying two things, the literary aspect, because the movie has a plot and characters. And what else are you enjoying? The dubbing actors what? The art of voice. But that's not the full movie experience. For the full deal, what do you have to do? Head to the movie theater. It's got its own language, so we can call it a language of art. So, what's the deal with the language of art versus everyday language? Let's chat about it. All declarative language is basically a statement, and every statement needs to use symbols, right? In a musical piece, each complete theme is made up of a bunch of notes, creating a layer of sound that we usually call a melody. Yeah, it's all about the story it tells. Sometimes, when we listen to a piece of music, it's like we're listening to it sentence by sentence, just like reading an article or a poem. Can you even pick out the sentences when you listen to music? When one sentence ends, can you tell when the next one starts? It's not as easy as it sounds. For example, let's say a performer is going to perform a musical piece, but they've never heard a previous performer's rendition. Assume there's no previous recording. They have to perform it themselves, right? The first thing they need to do when reading the score is what? They need to parse out the phrases, where one phrase begins and ends, just like punctuation marks in language. This is the first skill. The musical score doesn't tell you where to stop. There's a new sentence coming up. It's written out in a continuous stream, and you read the score up to that point. That's one complete phrase, and the second phrase is coming, and sometimes this phrase is very long. What's the best way for us to learn classical Chinese? Grab a classical text with no punctuation and add the punctuation yourself. It's a pretty cool skill. Once you've got the hang of it, your ability to read classical texts will get a big boost. There's no punctuation, you see. You have to figure it out based on your understanding and comprehension. Eventually, you'll know where to put a comma and where to put a period. If you're really basic and only use one type of punctuation mark, it's not good enough. Because modern punctuation marks can include commas, semicolons, periods, and ellipses, and so on. Can you use them all? So, this is a great way to improve your ability to read classical texts. When you're reading sheet music, it's just like that, you go through it line by line. Each line is like a statement, and it's all made up of symbols. So, where do these symbols get their meaning from? I'm putting a symbol down here. Hey everyone, take a look on the whiteboard. What's this thing? A cross, a plus sign, what else? That positive reaction on the medical test report in the hospital, what's that in electrical terms? Maybe it's the positive pole facing the negative pole. Is it really a cross, a plus sign, a positive pole, or a positive reaction? You can't be sure, you can't figure it out. You've got to fit the symbol into a statement, right? Alright, let's set that aside for now. This is a complete statement, a math statement. Now that this statement's here, the meaning of each symbol in it is finally figured out. This isn't a duck, right? It's not an ear either, it's 2 plus 3 equals 5. It's not a cross anymore. It's a plus sign, that's how everyday statements are. In this kind of everyday statement, we're not dealing with artistic statements. This isn't the language of art, it's the language of everyday life. Everyday language is all about analytical statements. What's an analytical statement? In a statement, the meaning of each symbol can be figured out by looking at the overall meaning of the statement. So, what's the overall meaning in this statement? It's addition, right? Because we've got the overall meaning of this statement, the meaning of each symbol it uses is analytically determined. It's either a cross or a plus sign. Everyday language is all about analytical statements, but artistic language isn't like that. I remembered a story. A true story. It was many, many years ago, back in the days when we used to listen to the radio all the time. One morning, I turned on the radio and heard that the Central People's Broadcasting Station was telling a story. What was the story about? It was about a Chinese language teacher in a primary school in Beijing. He gave the students a midterm exam, and one of the question types was what? Fill-in-the-blank questions, right? You fill in a word in the blank space in each sentence. So, there was a question in this fill-in-the-blank section that went like this: after the ice melts, it becomes a blank. You fill it in. The whole class, except for one student, filled in water because after the ice melts, it becomes water, which is the correct answer. However, one student filled in 2 words, springtime. When the teacher graded the papers, he marked an X and deducted 2 points because it did not match the standard answer. All the other students wrote water for the answer. This student said springtime after the ice melts. He was wrong. This incident spread and caused a sensation in the education community. Many people were very angry. Educators began to speak out and asked the Chinese language teacher, "What class are you teaching? If you are teaching a natural science class, we cannot criticize you, right? Elementary schools already have natural science. So, in a natural science class, some basic physics knowledge is taught to the students, right? If it's this kind of class, then the correct answer is water because this sentence is about what? Changes in states of matter, right? It changes from a solid to a liquid, which is taught in natural science class. But you are teaching a Chinese language class, and you actually have a standard answer called water. Except for this student, do you know what he is? He is the seed of a literary talent. Not only should you not deduct his points, but you should also give him extra points. I heard this broadcast. What was my first reaction? Finally, a student in a Chinese language class gave what? A comprehensive statement. What is a comprehensive statement? He had also made use of symbols, but to compose a comprehensive statement. In an analytical statement, the meaning of each symbol is defined one by one. A plus sign is just a plus sign, it's not a cross. This is an analytical statement. But when that student wrote springtime with 2 words, is that ice definitely referring to ice? Is the melting definitely referring to a change in state? No. It triggers our imagination. What could this ice possibly refer to? A long, dark age finally coming to an end, that's called melting. Springtime could refer to what? It doesn't necessarily refer to a season in meteorology and climatology. A new, hopeful era has finally arrived, right? What is the language of art? It's all comprehensive statements. In this kind of statement, the meaning of each symbol is not defined one by one, but what is opened up. In an analytical statement, the meaning of each symbol is closed, isn't it? In a comprehensive statement, the meaning of the symbols is not closed, but open, allowing our imagination. So I was thinking about Ma Ziyuan's A Bleak Fall Landscape, you know? Because it's not very easy, we can't just pull out a painting to explain it right now. Or take a piece of music, for example, to illustrate that is a comprehensive statement. Because of the limitations of the classroom, I often use poetry as an example, just like I recited a passage from My Motherland, My Rivers and Mountains, just now. From my motherland. In the first paragraph, where did he say the Great Wall was? He called it a chain, a 1,000-year chain. Is he really referring to the actual chain? Of course not, it's an important symbol, right? It refers to an actual child, his so-called my son in my hands, just died in my hands convulsing. Is it the specific thing being referred to? No. The comprehensive statement is really fascinating. It unpacks the meaning behind each symbol it holds. So where does that take us? To a world of imagination. This world is just waiting for us to step into it. So when you come across a line like withered vines, old trees, dusk crows, you wouldn't say, oh, he's talking about 2 plants and an animal. No way, that's not the point. It's a blend. Then comes another blend, like a small bridge, flowing water, a rural home. Another blend follows, an ancient road, the west wind, a thin horse. As I mentioned before, what does it achieve in a comprehensive statement? It turns the object into a symbol of meaning. The symbol is still a symbol, but it's packed with meaning, full of significance. In analytical statements, the object is always just the object. In comprehensive statements, the object is transformed into symbolic meaning. When these various symbolic meanings come together, what do they form? A symbolic meaning group. The context may be manifested within this symbolic meaning group. The transformation of the object into symbolic meaning is the function of the language of art. The form of each work is like its language, and this artistic language brings out the material, making it more tangible. This is basically turning the object into a symbol of meaning, which is what we call opening up the material. So, these symbols of meaning come together to form a group, a whole, you know? And what about this kind of statement? The relationship between symbols isn't a logical one, but rather it's about bringing these symbols into an imaginative connection. It's only through this process that a group of symbols of meaning can be formed, and then the scene of existence might or might not be presented within it, depending on what comes next. In my book, I talked about symbols and meaning. Symbolic meaning is derived from the symbol itself and its meaning. The meaning here refers to the connotation of the symbol, so the symbol no longer remains just the symbol, but is revealed as meaning. However, the meaning does not break free from the symbol, but is always born from the symbol, and remains sensory in nature. This meaning is not an abstract idea or concept, but retains its sensory quality. When we write poetry, we are not articulating a logical proposition, but rather providing a comprehensive statement. For instance, in the 1980s, a group of poets emerged in the Chinese poetry scene, known as the Menglong poetry movement. This movement shook up the traditional standards of Chinese poetry creation. It wasn't really misty as the name suggests, but it marked the beginning of the Menglong poetry movement. I often think that life should have a fulcrum, and this fulcrum is a monument, Tiananmen Square, built on a solid concrete base, erected as the dignity of the Chinese nation, a monument, a history museum, and the Great Hall of the People, like a massive scale, with history as the lessons of yesterday on one side, and today's rupture and the future on the other. The monument stands there silently, standing like a victor, like a hero who has experienced many failures in deep thought. The skeleton of the entire nation is its structure, the great sacrifices of the people gave it life. It awakens from the ancient darkness of the East, engraving everything unforgettable onto its body, and from then on its eyes focus on the world and the revolution, and its name is the people. What do we see here? A comprehensive statement. If you break down these statements, the symbols used are actually quite mundane. Concrete base, it's basically a mechanical concept, right? A balance, isn't it? How do these symbols become the language of poetry? But it's because of how they are combined. His way of putting things together, it's like he's turning these ordinary words like concrete and base into something else, you know? Like symbols. It's because the way he combines them is so unique, right? He's like, what's being built on that solid concrete base? The dignity of the Chinese nation. Then out of the blue, this really abstract word pops up, linked with these two really basic words. One's concrete, the other's base, and then there's construction, right? Like, building stuff. And then he drops the word dignity, and suddenly, everything changes. It's like this whole bunch of symbols just pops up. And within this group of symbols, you get this whole historical world of a nation unfolding. I reckon this example shows that art always makes a big statement in its own way, and it can really turn something ordinary into something magical. Don't think that a poem that looks all fancy and beautiful is just a bunch of fancy words thrown together. It's not. It's about whether you can use the form of your poetry to dig into the raw materials of the original stuff, and then turn it into a symbol. And when a bunch of symbols come together, that's when you start writing poetry. That's how you do it. So, we talked about something really important, which is how to keep and protect the natural power of our own minds. Just like that kid in elementary school who filled in spring for that fill-in-the-blank question.